Perfect. Okay. Right. So basically what we have here is this incredibly scientific phenomenon of when all is said and done, right? Meaning when that baby comes out into this world, who let's talk just about the mothers. Let's put aside the fathers for a change. The husbands, the men can take for a change being aside, okay? It's usually the other way around. Okay, so let's put away aside the husbands for right now. It's not important. But two women played a role in the birthing of this child, right? One woman gave the ovum, right, with all the DNA and everything else. But somehow, when it kind of needs to go from ovum to person, this woman in the middle cannot do that. This woman is the one who did that, right? So, on an objective level, this child came about by a combination of these two mothers, right? And then the question, I'm sorry, these two women. And the question that halacha needs to answer is, so who's the mom, right? Let's assume, I mean, let's play this kind of, let's assume that this is a Jewish couple and the woman is non-Jewish, for example. It could be also both are Jewish, right? But is the child Jewish? If the ovum parent is Jewish and the birth parent is not Jewish, is the child Jewish? Or even if both are Jewish, who is the halakhic mother? You know, I mean, is the baby a child from this woman or is the baby a child from this woman, right? So that's the big meta question that we're going to try to figure. In order to do that, let me first do something small and tell you how did I get involved in this question. So as I like to tell people, I teach at Chovevei, for those of you who don't know. I'm sure most of you know that. And fortunately for me, I do have the privilege at Chovevei of writing tshuvot. Part of my responsibility in the yeshiva, aside from teaching, is also to write responsa on various topics. And, we all have our interests. And, if you ask me a question about using a microwave on Shabbos, of course I'll answer you the question, but it's not something that gets me excited to kind of sit and write. Those are not the things that excite me. Everybody has their different interests. I like more kind of those issues that are kind of a little bit more nuanced and complicated. And I've written a lot on women's issues and LGBTQ issues and other issues, which I'm happy to share with you another time. This issue was prompted by a friend. So a very, very close friend of ours who was single, and of course, like most single people, really tried everything in the world to get married. Tried and tried and tried and tried and tried and tried, and it didn't work. And as we know, this is another one of those things that women are at a disadvantage. Women have a biological clock. The clock has been ticking, and she wanted to have a child. She wanted to have a child, and after waiting for years, a very close friend, and we were very close with her and her brother, she decided, I'm done. I can't wait around for, the prince on a white horse to come and save me. I want to have a child. I want to be a mother. Unfortunately, at that point, she was no longer able to carry a child to term. And therefore, she resorted to a surrogate mom. So it was her egg, which was impregnated by a sperm donor, but she could not carry the child to term. She had to have a surrogate woman to carry the child. The child is born, and now the question is the child Jewish or not? Her friend is a Jewish woman. The surrogate mom is not Jewish because generally, as we'll talk later, the recommendation among the poskim is to have a non-Jewish woman to be the surrogate mom for obvious reasons, because if it's a Jewish woman, you never know, you might bump into a relative when you get married, the baby's born as a girl, let's say, and they want to set up with a boy, and you're not going to remember that boy is the son of the surrogate mom. And then it's going to be incest and brothers and sisters. So usually the recommendation is that they should have a non-Jewish surrogate. What are the consequences of that? What happens when the baby is born? The first question that's asked. People can respond.
They have to, what about converting them? Are they?
Yep. Exactly. Thank you, Carol. Is the baby Jewish or not? Right? And that right away poses the question. Is the child the baby, the baby, the child of the ovum mother, the woman who gave the egg, or is the child the mother of the, is the baby the child of the surrogate mother? in which case the child is not Jewish. And if the child is not Jewish, the child has to go through a conversion. Carol, I love when I have in a class a person who has very visual expressions. Exactly this. This is how our friend felt. It was incredibly painful for her. And she tells us, Ysoscher, this is my child. It is a Jewish child. It is too painful for me to think that this is not my child, i.e., it is the surrogate mom's child, and therefore I need to give her a conversion. It was a girl. And she said, Ysoscher, for this love of my child, I'm not going to let my emotions dictate what to do. It is extremely painful for me to acknowledge that I need to do a conversion for her. But I do know that the world out there is not a simple place, and I don't want my daughter to grow up one day and someone say to her, oh, you were born by surrogacy? Oh, no, sorry, you're not Jewish. I can't marry you. I am going to do a conversion, but I wouldn't do it with anybody other than you. You are my friend and can appreciate the pain. And I cannot begin to tell you, as someone who is, the parent of 5 children who, Baruch Hashem, we did not have struggle with these issues, it broke my heart. It really broke my heart to think of here is a woman who, didn't have it easy anyway. It was hard enough as is. Finally, she came to a point where she kind of decided, okay, fine, I am going to have a child of my own. Turns out that you can't carry that child, just to go through all that process of finding a surrogate mother, finding the right surrogate mother, grappling with the emotional pain of that and all that. And finally, she has a baby in her arm. And she has a baby in her arm, and halacha tells her, maybe this is not your child. It was just bone crushing. It was very painful. In fact, we have another friend who did the same thing. She asked Rabbi, I can say who it is. She asked Rabbi Daniel Sperber from Israel. Some of you might know. And Rabbi Daniel Sperber says, you shouldn't do a conversion to your child because trust me, in a couple of years, halacha is going to come around to realize that the overmother is the mother. You are the right mother. Your child is Jewish. They don't need a conversion. Don't burden them with the kind of, category of a convert.
Interesting.
It might be a smart choice. It might not be a smart choice. Who said interesting?
Me, I did. Because Gloria's here, and the person who signed her, Gloria's Clough.
Yep,
Rabbi Sperber. Rabbi Sperber. Yeah. And as a matter of a side interest, Rabbi Sperber's son was an associate who worked son-in-law was an associate who worked with Gloria when she was an
Bruce.
attorney.
Bruce.
I mean,
very good friend of ours. Yes.
From Dafne Noam.
Exactly. Bruce is a very close friend. Exactly. So the interesting thing about Rabbi Sperber's psak is it's extremely sensitive, right? Sperber tells this Jewish woman, this Jewish mother, this is your child and the child is Jewish. Don't worry. Don't do a conversion because halakha is going to come around to my view. It's a risky proposition though, right? It could very well be that will not be the case, in which case, what is the downside? This child will grow up thinking they're Jewish, and at 18, they will be told that they're not, right? So that's a tough choice to make. I knew that Rabbi Sperber advises against conversion, which is very sensitive to the mom at the moment, right now, but it is a risk of, imagine a child living as a Jewish child till they're 18 or 25, and they want to get married, and they go to the Rabbanut, and the Rabbanut tells, give me your birth certificate, and it says, oh, surrogate mom, and the woman says, kiddo, sorry to tell you, the 25 years that you lived as a non-Jew. How crushing would that be? So that's kind of the tough choice. And ultimately, and I put in this picture deliberately, that's the way it's done when a baby goes through a conversion, right? The mom goes in to the water together with the child, and she dips the child in the water. To make matters worse, normally, at least when you do a conversion, at least you make a bracha. So at least there is some sanctity to the experience. There's some kedusha to the experience. Here, it's nicht daher, nicht dahin, as they say in Yiddish, because the kid has to be toveled and go through a conversion, but there's no bracha because maybe she doesn't need a conversion, right? So it's mamish really beat up on all sides. It was a very hard and painful experience. And that was my inspiration to kind of look into the topic. So I just wanted people to know kind of where halakha is at the moment and just the emotional human side of it all. It is a very painful experience, and it gets even more painful as we're going to move along. Okay, so what is the halakha? So who is the mom indeed in this case? Let me try out now for now. And, this is a safe space. I'm going to do it one more time, but really 15 seconds, everybody. I'm going to go around and ask everybody, starting with Bert. At this point, what would you say why, but not more than 20 seconds? Who is the mom?
Unfortunately, I still think
one second. Before people answer, don't be afraid to say something that might come across as harsh. Instinctually, logically, philosophically, what do you think and why in 15 seconds? Bert.
I think that
Go around
the
and I'll
baby
call
has to
people
be
on the
converted.
computer.
The baby
What?
has to be converted.
The baby has to be converted. Okay. Carol.
It's sad.
Carol?
Yeah, I think it's better to do it now.
But I'm not asking about better. Let me just be.
Yes.
I want to push people's thinking. I'm
Well-
not asking what's better. Instinctually, philosophically, logically, who do you think is the mother, and how would you explain why? So, Carol. I'm pushing you hard. I know. It's just an exercise. You're not going to be held accountable for it. I'm not going to tell anybody what you said.
She's the mother, it's her egg, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So
So you think the overmother is the mother?
yes.
Okay. Sai, you can disagree with Carol.
I think the mother is whose DNA is
Okay.
in the child. Simply.
So you threw in something in the mix.
Just the
But it's-
DNA should be enough to in today's age.
So we're moving along the question very interestingly, right? Which aspect of motherhood determines childhood, right? The DNA is clearly the overmother's. In fact, the surrogate mother doesn't contribute any DNA. I'll qualify that later. Today we kind of think it's a little bit otherwise. But Sai says, look, DNA is what makes up the essence of the persona. So of course, the DNA contributor is the mother. Thea. You're muted.
You got to unmute.
I also think it's, as far as like the DNA is the mother's DNA. Halakhically might be different, but the mother is
You would oppose saying, what would you
Oh,
say? Would you agree with Sai that it should be exclusive of DNA, or do you think it should be other variables that should determine that?
I think it should be DNA because especially if it's a girl, then also she has the problem if she's a convert, she wouldn't be able to marry a Cohen. So there's other problems.
That's the other piece that I forgot to mention, right?
Okay.
Exactly. Moshe, quickly, who should be the parent, the overmother or the birth mother?
I also think that the overmother and also the judge in the case in Israel decided that too.
Okay, good. Well, we can disagree with the judge in Israel, but I hear you. I hear you.
It
Police.
wasn't a religious court, but it was the court in Israel.
Right. Police.
Oh, she's
Police, are you
You
with
gotta
us?
unmute.
she's muted.
Yeah. You got to unmute,
Unmute
please.
yourself. Okay, we'll come back to police. Amy?
What?
Amy, you want to unmute yourself?
Unmuted.
Anyway, we'll come back. Okay. So that's the question in front of us. In order to properly explore this question, we need to start and go back to the history of vicarious birth. Let's call that vicarious birth, right? Cases where people cannot, for one reason or the other, have a child completely on their own, and they needed the involvement of another person, and the trajectory actually is important. So let me tell you the trajectory. The first question halacha had to explore was egg donation, right? So egg donation. So let's kind of remember the case, right? This is the kind of couple, Shlomo and Chani, and Shlomo's egg somehow cannot become fertilized. So a donor donates an egg, which is then fertilized by the sperm of the husband and implanted in Chani's womb. right? That was the first issue in halacha. Again, egg donation, meaning Hani carries the baby, but Hani's egg somehow cannot become fertilized. So we take an egg from someone else, fertilized by the husband, implanted in the wife, and then the wife carries the child to a term. That's what halacha addressed first. So again, let's just remember the direction. Let's have just fake names. The niece, Shlomo, and Hani. So in this case, the niece's egg is implanted into Hani's womb, and Hani carries the baby. That was the first case in halacha. Then halacha moved on to discuss surrogacy, right? Now in surrogacy, it's the reverse, right? Hani and Shlomo have an egg that can become fertilized by them, but Hani cannot carry the baby to term. So in order to do that, Hani's egg needs to be implanted into the niece's womb, right? So this is let me just reduce it so you can see both of them in contrast, right? So these two, it's a little bit small, but these two cases are the polar opposites, right? In the first case, we take an egg from the niece and put it into Hani's womb, right? Because Hani can carry a baby, but she cannot get pregnant. Her ovum cannot carry a sperm. So the niece's egg is in Hani's womb. And then in this case, it's the opposite. Hani's egg is in the niece's womb, right? So they're polar opposite questions. In one question, the egg donor is not Jewish. The carrier is Jewish. And in this case, it's the polar opposite, right? The egg donor is Jewish. It's her egg, the Hani's egg, that goes into the niece's womb, right? And here we have the question. This is why I love this chart so much, right? If you look at the child, so to speak, the old kind of famous book, right? Sprinzer has two mommies, right? Technically, turns out the Sprinzer has two mommies. Okay, so that's going to be the two cases. I will give you a little bit of a last final update, and that is that the last 3 months, the Haredi halachic community has been on fire. Why? Because now we have a different case. Now we also do uterine transplantation. Uterine transplantation. Now let me explain what uterine transplantation means. I mean, I'm sure that you guys, you know the science better than me, but let me explain to it. Uterine transplantation means when, unfortunately, the recipient does not have a functioning uterus. And that means the ovaries don't produce eggs, the uterine doesn't carry it, and then the womb doesn't hold the baby. Today, doctors can implant this entire piece, right? They basically can take the ovaries, the uterus, and the fallopian tubes from the niece and implant it into Hani. Now, why should this question be different than the previous two questions? Does anybody know, based on the science, what is the scientific piece that makes this a different case than the previous two cases? Let me just shrink it a little bit so everybody can see all three at once. And then let's see, what do you think, right? So case number one, again, is the niece donates an egg to Hani. Case number two is Hani implants her eggs into the niece. Case number three is uterine transplantation. So why is this case number three significantly different than cases 1 and 2? In fact, let me explain to you. The Haredi community does not allow 1 and 2 at all. They think it's not okay at all. I'll explain that next week more in depth. But the question has become, even if 1 and 2 are not okay, could number 3 be different? So I'm curious to hear from your thoughts. What do you think might be the reason why? What scientific variable explains why uterine transplantation is different? Someone. Amy's bobbing her head no. I am very, very attuned to my students' physical expressions. What does that mean, Amy?
This is complicated because I would have just said No, it's the DNA, but here the whole package has been, I don't know. I don't.
Yep. Yep. You're saying that actually in some ways it's worse, right?
Yes.
All of the niece, so to speak, all of the niece's reproductive, mechanism, so to speak, is now in Hannah's womb, but it's all the nieces, right? I mean, it's not like an egg and holding. The entire reproductive organ has been transplanted. Okay, so Amy thinks in some cases it's worse. Anybody want to add pro or con? What would complicate this case?
Well, as far as the DNA is, she's
Yes.
The DNA is now not the mother's DNA at this point.
Say more, Thea. Say more, because.
But halakhically, because she gives birth, the mother gives birth.
Wait. No, Thea, I'm going to stop you. Why is it not the DNA? I'm sorry. I'm assuming you know it, but let's spell it out.
Because a woman is born with all her eggs already formed, and that's with her DNA.
Okay, so that's a little bit more complicated. In the ovaries, the eggs are just cells. They cannot become pregnated in the ovaries. In order for them to become eggs which are ready to be impregnated, they have to leave the ovaries and get in the uterus, where they meet the sperm, and they become combined and become a person. Right? So what that means now is we are not taking the niece's eggs and putting it into Chani's womb. We're taking Tanice's cells, which will become an egg in Chani's womb and then become impregnated by her husband's sperm. So should that be a variable to consider, or should that not be a variable to consider, right? Meaning, in this case, we are not taking an egg from the niece and putting it here, which would have been kind of a miniature, so to speak, potential human being already, somewhat developed. No. It's just a cell. And in fact, it can't get pregnant when it's still a cell, right? The estrogen from the brain goes into the uterus, kicks out an egg, meets the sperm, and that's when it can become impregnated. So that means when we move this here, we have not transplanted an egg, unlike in this cases where we have transplanted a formed egg. We've only transplanted a cell. So what do people think? Should it matter or should it not matter? Amy, once again, very strong. Why not? Unmute.
It still is her DNA in that cell.
Okay, so you are very much in line with Sai, because for you, it's all about DNA. And I think Thea said the same thing, right? It's all about DNA. Whoever is the parent of the DNA is the parent of the child, because DNA is really the nucleus makeup of who we are. Everything else is just extra kind of to make the DNA work, make the DNA develop, but the core essence is the DNA, and therefore it should matter. I want to hear one opposing opinion, anybody, just for argument's sake. Would anybody say, oh, ovaries is different than eggs? Nobody. Oh, yeah. That's not a good sign. Uniformity in a Jewish community? What's wrong with you? Go ahead, Carol.
Would this have anything to do with organ donation?
In terms of what?
Well, you're taking an organ from another body and put it into a different body.
So I'm going to bracket what Carol said, but say 3 words about it. Is this considered what's the English word for that? Serous, when you making someone sterile, right? The halacha is that a person cannot what?
Right, sterilizing them.
Yeah. Would that, let's say if this is a Jewish woman, would that be a problem of kind of, taking out your ability to become pregnant, and would that be a problem of organ donation or organ supplantation? So that's an interesting question, but we'll put that aside. Yeah, you would think so, right? Right. So, but then the question becomes, what happens if the person is past childbearing age? Would that be different, right? The cells can still turn into ovums in another person's. Yeah, exactly. I know. I love. Thank you, Thea. Yes, it is very, very complicated. Yes. Okay. Let me one more time that reduces all this, so just going to have a good sense of the history, and then we'll plunge into the actual halacha. So this is the three scenarios that poskim have to deal with all the time, right? In some cases, Chana doesn't have eggs that can become impregnated, right? Her ovum somehow cannot take sperm, so then she needs a donation of an egg. That's case number one. Case number two is the opposite. Their ovum is able to take sperm and become pregnant, but you cannot carry a baby. Case number three is there are no viable ovums, no viable eggs at all. Can we now do uterine transplantation?
Oh,
The reason why the reason why uterine transplantation should be different is because uterine transplantation involves the transplantation of cells, not eggs. Is that a fact? Okay, someone wanted to say something?
Yeah, I did. Why is this
Yes,
more
Burton
of an
and Moshe.
acceptable? Why is it more of an acceptable thing in the Haredi community
Yes.
for number three as opposed to the other two?
So we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. That's the interesting thing. The Haredi community, and again, I want to stress that we'll discuss it more next week, would never, ever allow one or two. Never, ever. We'll see why. It's a crazy idea why. Never not allow one or two. Like I said, for the last 3 months, it's been a fierce debate. I mean, I can't even begin to describe yet. Like every fierce debates, everybody thinks that the other one is, either cruel or fanatic, and it's just been a very vibrant and intense debate because of the variable that it's not an egg yet. So it is 2 steps removed of becoming a person. Moshe.
Is it a donation of a uterus from a donor that's alive?
Yes, absolutely.
No.
Absolutely. Yes. It's a donation of a donor. Again, the question goes Jewish or non-Jewish. There is a preference for relative donations because then it kind of it's easier to take. But that causes more problems, right? If you have the uterus of your sister, does that mean that your husband sleeps with the wife's sister? So that kind of causes problems. So there's a lot of exploration. Carol is smirking, I can tell.
One other thing, I'm just remembering something I learned years ago in Gemara, I think, that if a tameh basket is swallowed by an elephant, and when it's passed out, it's not tameh. Is that relevant to this kind of a question?
So you know what? Moshe jumped the gun, but you know what? I'll come back to what you said, Moshe. So let's jump into the halacha. What do the poskim say? So obviously, this is not a question that you'll find a Gemara, or you'll find even a Rambam, or you find even a Shulchan Aruch, because they didn't know the science, right? The Shulchan Aruch never thought of this idea of what do we do in a case of egg donation? What do we do in a case of surrogacy? What do you do in a case of uterine transplantation? There's nothing. The first time ever in halakhic history that this is discussed is around 1842, where we have two vote, which I'm going to go over with you briefly, that discuss the question. Why? Because someone, and I love to tell the background a little bit. I always tell people, when you study old Chuvot, whether from the 13th century, 14th century, 18th century, whatever it is, stop for a minute and imagine yourself being that rabbi in a little shtetl, living, in this little Jewish bubble, not knowing much of what goes on in the world. Every now and then, the town's smart aleck comes home and says, oh my gosh, I read in a Zeitung, I'm using deliberately the Yiddish word for a newspaper, I read in a Zeitung some incredible discovery, and it's amazing what goes on in the Goyish Welt, and the rabbi is so, enamored by this kind of thing, and he kind of starts thinking about what would halacha say. It is always interesting to think the psychology of it all. So in 1842, just a second, let me just finish this too, and then I'll take questions, but for some reason, there is a rumor spreading among Jews that doctors are making uterine transplantation. It was a false rumor. The science of uterine transplantation, I think, is about 20 to 25 years. But somehow, for about 100 years ago, there's a rumor among a couple of rabbis that doctors are doing uterine transplantation, and what will be the halacha? So it becomes this nice little discussion of a couple of rabbis. They're not dumb. Both of them say, I don't believe it's true. I don't believe science is advanced enough to do that. But in the hypothetical, let me tell you what I think. Okay, so let me just read briefly the two tshuvot, and then I'll take a question from you, Bert. So the first one is from to Rabbi Yosef Schwartz, and this is a tshuva written by Rabbi Benjamin Weiss, a very prominent rabbi in Czernowitz. Some of you might be familiar with Czernowitz, a very prominent city in Poland at the time. And let me briefly read for you in translation. Okay. So this Rabbi Weiss writes to Rabbi Schwartz, which, by the way, doesn't know Yiddish. It's pretty funny. Rabbi White writes to Rabbi Black. But anyway, it's kind of funny. He says, I got your letter in terms of the science that doctors developed to cut to cut out the uterine from a woman who is alive, goes to your question that you asked before, and they attach it into the body of a woman who is infertile or cannot carry children. And that way she'll be able to give birth. And the question that we ask, Mihi aim hayelad, who would be the mother of such a child if the niece's uterus was implanted into Hannah's stomach? Who would be the mother of that child? Harishona or Hashniya, the common nafka minel inyan dina. And there's a lot of different consequences for this question. So first he touches what Carol said. Is it allowed to do that? Are we allowed to extract a uterus from one person and thereby sterilize them? So he says, in terms of whether it's allowed to do or not, I think it's not allowed. Because if it was a Jewish woman, just a second, Amy, you would be sterilizing the woman by taking away her ability to become pregnant. So he says as follows. I'm responding out of respect for you. This is Baba Mises. This is baloney. I don't think it's real. I find it hard to believe that is true. But still, in case it turns out it's true, here's what I think. It's just not allowed to do that. Even if it's not dangerous, the mere fact that you're causing a woman A to be sterilized, that's an isur. Because you are causing the woman to no longer be able to conceive. So definitely, if you ask me whether it's allowed to do, the answer is no. But, and this is where it gets funny, and let me just kind of introduce it, and this goes back to something that Moshe mentioned. But now he has to answer the question of who is the mother in such a case. And this is where this conversation is going to become funny or frustrating or annoying or exciting, depending where you are on the Yeshiva Bacher spectrum. What do I mean by that? You're not going to find a Gemara that talks about it, right? So if you're not going to find a Gemara that talks about it, what is a rabbi to do? I'm asking you a question, people. Answer me. I want to hear a few answers. You know that you're not going to find a Gemara that talks about it, right? The Gemara never explicitly addresses egg donation, surrogacy, uterine transplantation, but halachicists always have to reference rabbinic texts. So what will you do? Anybody?
Well,
yes, go
to
ahead.
some
Amy.
extent, that goes.
One second, Amy raised her hand and then
interject.
Bert. What? Amy and then Bert. Amy and then Bert.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So I'm going back to my assumption was they were going to be taking this uterine out of a currently living woman, but for whatever reason, she wasn't going to continue to be living. That's where I'm coming from.
Oh.
I can't even fathom, like, in what situation would you morally go and take a uterine out of a woman and sterilize her to give to another woman. That just seems completely immoral. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Right. So let me be clear again what I said before. It is possible for a woman who is past childbearing age to still have viable cells that, if implanted into a woman who could conceive, that they would turn into children.
Okay.
Okay? So that's kind of answer number one, right?
But then you're not making the woman sterile. If she's past childbearing.
Great question. Making a woman sterile means extracting the birthing limbs. Even if technically she no longer can have children, the mere fact that these are the birth-giving limbs is still asur. Great question, Amy, but that's the halakha. Thea, I can tell that you're very pained, so just chime in and then I'll get to Bert.
Well, I'm not sure if she's beyond childbearing age, that the eggs would still be viable. They're very old eggs, so they're not necessarily very healthy eggs. And I don't even know if her hormones have changed, if they'd even be viable anymore.
Right. I mean, another option is that it would be a non-Jewish woman, right? So a non-Jewish woman doesn't have to have children, so there's no problem. But then the question is, why is there a problem with sterilization? I hear you. It's kind of, I hear your question. Bert, what were you going to say?
Yeah, going back to what we started off to some extent, they don't refer back to, in terms of surrogacy, they don't refer back to Yaakov Avinu, instead of the Avos who actually did surrogacy. And that, you would think that would be.
So here's the thing. I mean, I think it was Carol who mentioned it before, right? Hagar. Hagar is not relevant to our case because there was no transfer of limbs or eggs or anything. All Sarah said was, Abraham, why don't you go sleep with Hagar with her eggs, and then the child will be mine because I'm the master and therefore I can take the child, right? So that's very different than our case. There is a case of our forebears that might be relevant. Anybody want to guess or anybody know? There's a funny midrash. Anybody know? Okay, so I will mention this ahead of time because we have to wrap up and we'll continue next week. There is a midrash that tells the story with Rachel and Leah. Child number 7 of Rachel was a boy. So she had 7 boys: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Ysoscher, Zebulun, and soon to be born boy number 7. And finally, her sister Rachel gets pregnant. And it is a girl. They know that it's going to be a girl. Don't ask me how they know it's going to be a girl. Rachel said, I'll feel terrible if my sister would not have a boy. And God miraculously switched the 2 babies, and Rachel started carrying a boy, and Leah carried a girl, and Leah has Dinah, and Rachel has Yosef. That's the earliest example that we have of, so to speak, scientific egg donation. Now, Thea is smirking her head off. So am I. But that's the best we have, right? We will never have explicit texts that talk about this, but we have, far-fetched midrashim, foreign cases. And let me tell you one more example. So this rabbi that we talked before, he goes to the halakha of grafting, right? We know that we have a bunch of halachot when grafting trees and branches and so on and so forth. And this becomes his source to the answer. Because, and with that, we'll wrap up and continue next week. Here's the question. We all know that for the first 3 years of a tree, it's orla, right? You cannot eat the fruits of the first 3 years of a tree, right? Correct? What happens if I have an ancient fig tree in my backyard, and then 6 months ago, I planted a new fig tree in my yard, but I want to eat the new figs. I want to eat the new figs. I don't want to wait 3 years for the new fresh figs. So here's what I do. I do a little trick. I cut off a branch from the new tree, and I graft it into the old tree. right? I cut off a branch from the new tree that's only 6 months old, and I graft it onto the old, right? I'm going to stick it into the branch of the old tree, band-aid it up. Now the young branch has been integrated into the old tree. The halacha is that baby branch becomes grandma branch. Because it has been grafted on to the old tree, and now it gets its nourishment from a tree that's 50 years old, long past its orla stage. The halakha is that all the figs growing on that baby branch at 6 months old have the status of old figs that you're allowed to eat right away, and you don't have to wait 3 years. Ergo, it shows that what? For our question, that's proof that what?
We can implant.
Yes. That when you implant something into something else, the host overpowers the status of the donor, and it takes out the status of the donor, of the host. That is this rabbi's proof. He says, look, right? The only place I can find a source for this question, who adin hamavoer b'shas sota, this is a halakha that I just mentioned. Yalda, a young branch. That they grafted onto an old tree, le'inyan orla, which the halakha is that these figs are now considered ancient figs. So you see that the host status overwhelms the implant status. Ergo, if you implant a uterus from A to B, now B is the mother. Is that a good proof or not a good proof? Are you convinced or not? Thea is convinced. Amy is smirking and Carol is perturbed. And Milton is not reacting and Bert is smirking. Okay, let's start with Carol. Carol, why are you not convinced? Yeah, I'm not hearing you, Carol. I'm not sure why. Yes.
It's just so different. You know, talking about a tree versus a person.
Right? That's the first problem of these questions. How dissimilar can the mashal be to the nimshal that we can still say, oh, if trees get grafted, so too uterines have the same halakha, right? I mean, that's always the question when halakha. I mean, I'll give the example always when we talk about microwave, right? What is the halakha of microwave? I mean, there's no microwave in the Gemara, but there is non-fire heat in the Gemara. How similar do they have to be to say it's good, a valid analogy, to it's no longer a valid analogy? Thea, you were bobbing, Amy, you were smirking, and Bert too. So, and with that, we'll wrap up. Thea, why were you smiling?
Well, to me, oh, hold on a second. My phone's ringing. Anyway, it just seemed that halakhically it would make it, a way of getting around everything of the DNA, and so that the birth mother is the mother of the child, so that
Right. I mean, another way of saying, Thea, tell me if this is the correct summary. I'm going to end in 2 minutes. Is in response to Carol, this is what we have, right? You know, you're right, Carol. I mean, we would love to find text that talks about humans, not about branches, but the halakha can only function if we believe that precedent is the determinative factor. We're going to have to go far out on a limb, pun intended, right? And kind of try to find what is the closest example that we can find where there is a existing status and a pre-existing status, who wins? So yeah, Amy, smirk, Bert, smirk, and then we'll finish.
Yeah.
Amy?
I'm not smirking. I just, go ahead, Amy, go ahead.
I really don't have an answer to this. I just find it hard to digest that this is the conclusion.
No, it's not the conclusion. It's a starting conversation. No, it's not a conclusion. It's
Yeah.
a starting conversation. So there's more to come.
Like it's apples and oranges. It's a baby and a tree. There's no comparison.
Right. Apples and potato chips, he meant to say, right?
Okay, Amy. This is Bert. Rabbi, can you just wait a minute, please, before you sign off? Because Amy, I'm the convener of this study group, and you're a relative newcomer. Can you please give me your email address if you would like me to send you stuff about what we're doing?
Sure. I'm usually not available at this time, and I happen to see it. And, that's what I do.
You're not usually available, as I said, because we meet at 11 o'clock regularly on Mondays.
Should I just put it in the?
Oh, yeah, but I'd have to be able to, why don't you just tell it to me, if you can. It'd be faster for me.
A.D. Schimmel, SCHIMMEL @gmail.com. But I find it very interesting.
Okay.
Okay, so before I log off, let me just kind of introduce what we're going to do next week, because just to get it set, not next week, in 2 weeks, right? So this was all background information. This was all kind of laying out what the question is and what the issues are and what the history is. The real question starts with, is egg donation allowed in the Torah? Is there a problem at all? Can one donate their eggs to another person, or can one be a recipient of egg donation? I'm not going to tell you the answer. I want us to sit on this question. I will only tell you that these are the 3 most prominent modern rabbis who took a stand on this issue. And we'll discuss them next week. Rabbi Wosner was one of the most important poskim in Bnei Barak, as was Rabbi Nassim Gestetner, both of them not alive. And then this is Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Halevi, who is in Belgium, a Belgian posek, and he is still alive. They disagreed on this fundamental question radically. Is egg donation allowed? Is eggs receiving allowed? Think about it, and we'll start Monday after next, because next Monday is Shavuot.
Sameach, everybody.
Could that please be included in your notification?
Oh,
Sure,
Tova, I didn't realize you. Hi, Tova. I didn't recognize you.
I just noticed that it was on and came on late, but this is
sure, no problem. Absolutely. I'll send you Bert Tova's email out, okay? I'll send you Tova's email in a second. Okay?
Okay, very good.
Hot Sameach, everybody. Pleasure learning with you.
Thank you.
We'll continue. Thank you for joining. It's wonderful.